Thank you so much for joining us today for this wonderful discussion about education and finding more equity and ways of creating inclusive practices in the world of music education. We have several fantastic panelists with us today, and I'd like to just start by allowing them to introduce themselves to you and tell you a little bit about what they do in the world of education. And I'd like to start with Dr. Rufus Jones.
Well, good evening. Good evening. Thank you so much. Of course, I'm Rufus Jones. I live in Miami, Florida, and I am music director of Gulliver Preparatory, which is a private school in Pinecrest Village, which is right outside of Miami. I am a conductor, music educator, author, and I also conduct the Florida Youth Orchestra, which is a wonderful program in Broward County. And I'm the lead conductor of the Miami Music Project.
Fantastic. And how did you come to start putting equity and inclusion at the center of your work? How did the importance of that come to you?
It was something that I experienced a very long time ago as a high school student. And recognizing something that I hadn't realized until my senior year. I don't really have a sad story in terms of how I was brought up and my musical upbringing. I had wonderful music teachers, wonderful parents, family, friends to support me as growing as a young musician. I loved music. I loved every aspect of music, but I never thought I could do this as a vocation. It was just something that I just never dreamed of doing until my senior year. And it kind of goes to what you were asking in terms of equity and inclusion. My senior year, I had the experience of working under a Black music director by the name of Van Henry. It was the first time I had seen someone in a leadership authoritarian position teaching music. And at that moment, I realized, this is something that I want to do for a living. I had an affinity and still do have an affinity for just understanding how to correct issues in an ensemble, what to listen for. Didn't know I was conducting at the time, but that was a part of what being a conductor is. And working with premier world-class musicians who just happen to be African American. So it's representation. It's recognizing that someone is looking for guidance. Someone is looking for hope. And that's what I was missing. I was missing hope. I was inspired in many ways, but I was missing hope. And that hope translated to seeing someone who looked like me. And culturally, how important that is. Because many in the area where I grew up in Dallas, Texas, we didn't see Black classically trained musicians. They existed, of course, but we didn't see it. So it's the representation. It's getting rid of the perception, the negative perception of what we cannot do. And I know now, having done this for almost 30 years, that I am that person. When I'm in front of my students, particularly my Miami Music Project students, primarily African American and Latino, that they're looking for something, they're looking for hope. And that can be embodied with someone who looks like them.
That's fantastic and beautiful. Our next panelist is Tony Brown. And I'd love for you to just tell us a little bit about what you do and how it comes to intersect with the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how you got into that.
Well, thank you. It's so great to be here. Yes, I've been involved in music all of my life. I run an organization called Heart of Los Angeles. And so we are in LA, and we exist to make sure that kids have truly equitable access to opportunities that will help them realize their dreams. We believe that every kid deserves a chance, regardless of their socioeconomic status, their gender, or anything else. There just shouldn't be barriers for children, to find that success. And if we can do that through academic support, family support, visual arts, music, health and wellness, then that's what we'll do. And we'll throw as much at them as we can to help inform and inspire, right, what their next steps will be when they turn into young adults. And I think for me, this was so important because, growing up, I went to a small little Catholic school in a tiny little town, and I received my first instrument, which was the clarinet, in third grade. And since it was a little Catholic school, I was able to have band from third grade all the way through eighth grade. And I come to appreciate music in all its forms. And I joined the boys choir. I sang in choir in college. And yes, back then my little school, there were no other Black kids in my school at first. So that was something. And it was obvious to me how few of us there were outside of other forms of music that I'd grown accustomed to through my own family. My dad loved jazz, grew up in the South Side of Chicago. But, just in your typical school program, there was something at least, but maybe not a lot. And then coming to Heart of LA, I realized that my kids there, many of whom go to some of the poorer schools in the district, have a very fragmented, disjointed musical experience. Maybe one year they're given the opportunity to play recorder, and then maybe they're given a string instrument if they're lucky. And then all of a sudden it stops when they get to middle school. There's no way to continue in that instrument through school. And now maybe they get to high school and there's music again, but it's, guitar, right? So you're always starting over, and you're not really having that opportunity to have those rich experiences that I think can be transformative. And of course, there again, as an adult, I would go to concerts at our, concert halls, and I'd realize that the pre-reception, that maybe I'm still the only Black person in the room, or one of only a few. And I thought, golly, there's just not a pathway for kids, particularly kids of color, or opportunities, equitable opportunities for them to be in this room together with me. So how can we fill that void? And I think that's what draws me to the work and what keeps me in it, because music brings such joy, and it encourages me to do so many other things in life. And so I want every kid to have that opportunity.
Right. Wow. Well, thank you so much for everything that you do. You're impacting so many people's lives through Heart of LA. I was going through the website, and I was just thoroughly impressed by all of the programs that are going on there. So absolutely amazing.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
So on this call, we have educators ranging the spectrum of what it means to be a music educator. So these are people from secondary schools and colleges and community music programs and beyond. And Sara Haefeli is one of my colleagues at Ithaca College, and I've just really been taken by some of the things that she's done to reimagine the ways that we teach music history. So can you tell us a little bit about that and how you got involved in that?
Sure. Thanks, Stephen. It's such an honor to be here. I'm just really humbled to be part of this group today. So, like Stephen said, I teach music history. I've taught for about 20 years, and I've only recently become really passionate about equity and diversity in the music history curriculum. And I'm also the editor of the Journal of Music History Pedagogy. And the reason why I've really changed the way that I approach my classes because I started listening to my students. And specifically in 2015, we had Black Lives Matter protests on campus. And one of the students asked if we could talk about what was happening on campus in the music history class. And at first I thought, no, we've got to study the Ars Nova or whatever it was that day, and but I stopped long enough to think about it, and I said, sure, we can talk about it, but you have to lead the discussion. And the student was happy to do that. And so we arranged the class in a circle, and I sat on the outside of the circle, and the students talked about the music curriculum, how it lacks representation, how limited it is, how they don't feel prepared to go out and teach in a diverse musical world. And it was pretty humbling. So that was one of the experiences that really shaped the way I'm thinking about my curriculum. And the other one was with a student one day who had this fantastic way of questioning what was happening in the class. And I was teaching musical experimentalism, which is my personal field and what I do research on, and music of John Cage and his crowd. And this is music that really tries to challenge the boundaries of who's a composer and who's an audience member, what is sound and what is noise and music. And so I showed an example of graphic notations by a dead white guy, Martin Feldman. And the student raised her hand and said, wait, if experimentalism is about questioning boundaries, why did you pick this example? And I said, well, Feldman is a genius and as soon as I said that, I realized I was caught in a trap, like, oh, that's like white privilege right there. And then I tried to backpedal from it and said, well, it's the first one. And then it's like, oh, no, that's bad too, because I'm caught in this, evolutionary teleology. It's the first. So I had to backpedal. And then I finally said, yeah, I should have picked a different composer, perhaps a female or composer of color, but picked this one. And I thought, I'm being really brilliant. And I said, but any example that we engage with in music history, we can engage with that example with respect. And left class, and I was really proud of myself for handling that situation. And then the next day, this student came to talk to me during office hours. And she was a saxophonist, Stephen, actually. And she just fell on the wrong dividing line of every line. She's a saxophonist who didn't play jazz. She's half black, half white. She grew up in rural Vermont. and she came to me and she said, when you said that we should engage with every example in class with respect, you are right. I just want you to know that I have to engage with identities other than my own with respect every single day. And it is exhausting. And that moment just broke me. So I just really tried to change the curriculum. And also because of what Rufus was saying, that representation is so important, I also decided if I was really going to make my classroom and my curriculum diverse, I needed to decenter myself as the professor. So instead of lecturing to students on the white canon of dead white guys in music history, we now work through case studies. And it's a much more collaborative approach where the students are doing active research in the classroom.
Awesome. Thank you. And your model of case studies has really inspired me a lot. And I'm still trying to work it into my curriculum of teaching saxophone, and it's really opened my eyes in a lot of different ways. So thank you so much for that.
Well, thanks.
Lecolion, can you tell us a little bit about what you do and how you came to lift voices of all backgrounds in your work?
First off, thanks for having me as part of this conversation. I really appreciate getting the opportunity to meet everyone as we go through the conversation. I'm sure I will. I'm a bassoonist by trade. I'm a classical bassoonist. I studied at the University of Texas in the Manhattan School of Music. And I won a couple of orchestral auditions before taking a job as a bassoon professor at the University of Missouri. And then I took a job from there, becoming the bassoon professor at the University of Memphis. And I was there for 13 years. That's where I was living when I met Randal Goosby. He was probably 11 at the time, but that's when I met him. My tenure project was to record a CD of music for bassoon by Black composers. And so that was really the beginning of a journey for me to kind of, I think, to Sarah's comment, kind of decentering whiteness in the way that I thought about this field. That was the beginning of that journey. I really did it because I thought it would be like a dope tenure project. Like that was really the reason that I did it. But as I got into the process, it really created this evolution in my own thinking about what this field was. And the work that I have started to move into after being a performer and doing that for over 20 years and being in academia for 15 of those 20, and then moving into doing community-based work. My wife and I, we started originally a chamber ensemble that became an international chamber music festival, that became a chamber orchestra, that became this full organization that had partnerships with the school system in Memphis. I moved to some consulting, and now the work that I'm doing here in Boston, I'm the executive director of the Community Music Center of Boston, which is one of the largest community music schools in the country, and it's the largest provider of arts education in the Boston public public school system. And that journey for me has really been just me. I think actually on many levels going backwards in time, going back to where I'm actually from and going back to the person who I was, I think, as a young person before I was assimilated into this thing of classical music. It's been this journey, for me to become really my true and almost former self. And really for me right now, I'm trying to create opportunities for young people to never have to go through that same journey where you are who you are, you have to become someone else in order to be successful. And then once you're successful, you can go back to being who you were. But I'm really trying to, as I think about creating the next generation and supporting the next generation of musicians, creating spaces for them where they can recognize that they can maintain their true and authentic selves and also engage in this art form. I'm actually teaching a class at the Laundry School right now because I'm thinking about my work from an arts administrative perspective now, but the class is disrupting white supremacy in arts organizations. Let's just be honest about it. And it's really, again, this is exciting. Someone who, taught freshman theory for a number of years to go from teaching freshman theory, which is a key assimilation tool. And for me, the way that I view freshman theory is that it is an assimilation tool because you're taught that in order to get the keys and to get access to this beautiful art form, you've got to listen to Beethoven string quartets first, right? You've got to listen to Mozart piano sonatas. And then once you do that well enough, then you can have the keys to this beautiful thing you love, and maybe you'll understand Stevie Wonder better. Whereas maybe I would understand the music better if it was presented from Stevie Wonder's perspective, because that's the music that I grew up with. And so really in my journey now, thinking about the future, is how do we normalize that? Rather than it being like, you got to go over there to get that, or you got to go over there to get that. How do we start to normalize this idea that everyone's upbringing and their culture has value? And we talk about music being a unifying force. How do we actually create that in practice rather than just in the language that we use? Because we say, it's the unifying force. And if we can all read music and we can just get on stage and play together, and yet we don't actually do that in practice. And so then how do we create places, spaces that do that? And how do we create individuals who expect it? And how do we support those individuals who expect that?
Wow. Thank you for that. That's so inspiring. And it's very nice to see you, Lecolion, after so many years. We did a little bit of work together there in Memphis. So sort of moving us forward in the conversation, and you touched on this a little bit in what you just said, but as we've seen and as we've heard, everyone on this call has taken very different paths to occupy very different and unique spaces within this sphere of music education. And in those various spheres, it's unquestionable that there are a number of barriers that we face in trying to make things more accessible, more normalized, as Lecolion was talking about. I think about when I started violin, and the reason I started violin actually is because my mother was aware of the fact that music education was not a priority in many if not most of the public schools here in the United States. And so she took it upon herself to make sure that I had access and I had the ability to learn how to express myself on an instrument. And so along those lines, I'm wondering if we can sort of go around the room, so to speak, and just get everyone's perspective on maybe 2 or 3 of the sort of most prevalent challenges that you've noticed, whether it's in your particular field within music education or just at large. And I'm wondering if we could start with Dr. Haefeli.
Yeah, so I mean, Lecolion really, named it, that there are assimilating moments in music or music education, not just in higher ed, but all throughout, right? So I thought about this quite a bit. I think the barriers to change are, for one, at least in my field, in the field of music theory, are the existing resources. That the textbooks that we have, the existing curriculum that we have is so canon oriented. And that's hard to change, just because so often we do have applied faculty or performance faculty teaching these classes, and you can't expect them to invent something afresh. So you just kind of hand them the textbook, and the textbook is I mean, let's name it, it's a white supremacist textbook representing a white supremacist history. So I think that's one of the big barriers. And I think the second big barrier is the existing pedagogy. I don't think it's just the material that's problematic. I think it's the way that we teach the material. This idea that the professor is the expert, and that the students are supposed to be passive, and that we're going to somehow measure success by tests and quizzes and maybe a research paper. I think those methods of instruction are supremacist. I think they devalue individualism. They don't recognize the value or the gifts that students bring to a classroom, which are significant. So it's the resource, it's the pedagogies.
Thank you for that. Yeah, those are 2 that certainly pop into my head, as after having been a conservatory student for a number of years in college and even pre-college as well, which is even more so, what we've been talking about is an assimilative, is that a word? Assimilative environment, so it's very true. Thank you for touching on those points. Could we perhaps move to Dr. Jones?
Thank you, Randal. Please call me Rufus. You're making me feel way too old. Listen, for me, my training as an orchestral conductor, talking about representation, talking about perception. When I made the decision to become an orchestral conductor, it was moving away from the goal of being a band director. I played a wind brass instrument for most of my time in high school and college, and just started playing double bass, and just found the idea of playing the orchestral repertoire or conducting the orchestral repertoire fascinating, and it was something that I wanted to do. So strange, and I talk about this. I wrote a book about the life of Dean Dixon. It's called Dean Dixon, Negro at Home, Maestro Abroad. And it's the life of an African-American conductor who was the first African-American conductor to conduct the New York Philharmonic, and had to leave the United States in 1949 because he couldn't find a job. He left the United States for Europe and became a star in the world of classical music. Representation, perception. Can we do this? Are we capable of doing this? Do we have the ability to grasp the canon, Beethoven, Mozart, Brahms? That's a perception that I have found I've had to deal with for the 30 years that I've been conducting and teaching. I've had to deal with, is doctor your nickname? No, I actually have a doctorate in orchestral conducting. Where did you go to school? Wow. I still have to deal with that. How impressive. I always get that phrase, how impressive. And having to essentially Not that I'm interested in proving myself to anyone, because it's really not about me. I've already done the work. I've done the work and done the work well. But I'm just surprised. I'm talking about obstacles. We're talking about issues of being different. How difficult it still is for someone who looks like me to get in front of an ensemble, no matter what that ensemble looks like, and being fully accepted. It's not until the work is done, it's not until I finish that rehearsal that there is I guess he actually can do this. And so that's something I still deal with today, and I see it. And I'm fortunate enough to serve as a mentor for a lot of young music teachers in the Miami area. And just the idea of that, how do I get beyond what they expect, or what they have maybe a misrepresentation of who I am? How do I get beyond that? We're still trying to answer that question.
So true, and I'm sure very relatable for all of us on this call. I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Tony.
Wow. Well, I believe, I truly believe in my heart of hearts that every child has the potential, to succeed in music. And they just have to be given an honest shake at it. And I think about what does that look, I think, what does that look like? How do you make it equitably accessible to succeed? And I think you have to think about, or I think about, where my kids are coming from. In our city in Los Angeles, so many of the kids that we serve who are going to our public schools, I think it's something like 97% of them in LA Unified are on free and reduced lunch. So therefore, before they're ready to learn, ready to take in all the magic, right? How did you sleep last night? Did you have breakfast? Did you have lunch? How are you feeling? Need a snack? What's going on at the house? I see you slouching. I see you tuned out. I mean, you can't begin to learn Mahler or, or Beethoven if you haven't gotten at the root of how a child is doing. Is their cup half full, or is it empty, half empty? And I feel like if my kids that I'm serving now had to go through the music programs that I had to go through in the early 70s, they'd have quit music a long time ago. You have to approach it in this way. We have an orchestra program in partnership with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and we've thrown everything at these kids, Gustavo Dudamel, star power, fancy schmancy, this, that, and the other thing. And I guarantee you, if we hadn't just been there to take care of the basics, none of that would have mattered. None of that would have worked. So it was the partnership that makes that happen. It's overcoming the barriers to learning in the first place that create the equitable opportunity for those kids to then soar. Maybe a little extra patience, maybe the one-on-one attention, that they can receive from mentors. We partner, I heard, we were talking about Longy School of Music. We have some wonderful students at Longy School of Music who come and partner with our kids and just ask them how they're doing and meet them where they're at every day. And together they pull through, to where now they're playing beautifully, as high school students, and they've stayed with it. So I think the biggest barrier is handling the basic needs, because so many kids of color, in particular, are without some of those basic needs that help them to get on with the next goal in life.
Wow. Yeah, again, so poignant. I mean, meeting a child or even an adult, frankly, where they're at, and understanding that everybody's an individual, everybody's coming from a different place, and not everybody's trying to get to the same place. And so, having that knowledge and that perspective before going into an interaction like that is so crucial. Finally, Lecolion, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this question about some of the barriers.
I would say, I tend to think about the barriers as what are the things that those in power create? How do they create these barriers for young people? So, Again, one of my colleagues said to me once, he said, a young person is not a problem, and a young person is not the solution to our problems. A young person is just a young person, right? And just like trying to think about young people, a young person who is on free and reduced lunch the same way that we would think about a young person at a private school, and use the same language when we describe them, and say that these students have the same capacity, ability as anyone else, and just really focusing on our language. But I would say that there's probably two key things I think we could do that would allow us to be able to do that. The first one, and I'm glad I'm last because I get a chance to take notes. It gives me, I'm sorry, I feel sorry for those who had to go first. I get a chance to take some notes. I'm like, ooh, that's really good. That made me think about. But the one of them is being learner centered. I think that a lot of our pedagogy is very much teacher centered. What does the teacher like to teach? And that the learner is this empty vessel that the brilliant master teacher pours their brilliance into this empty vessel of a human being. And whereas I think that the problem with that is we don't realize that the people that we're working with are already so full of so much. And so it's really our responsibility to support them as they're activating their own best selves. Rather than us pouring into this empty vessel. And so really thinking about having a learner-centered and asset-based relationship with the young people that we're working with, rather than this whole deficit framing on them that, again, that they're missing something and we're the answer for them. And that leads me to the key thing, and that is one of the major challenges in education sometimes is those of us who are doing the teaching. I think that oftentimes we are the problem because we have a very much of a fixed mindset. And we talk about having a growth mindset for our students, but we don't talk about having a growth mindset for ourselves as teachers, as administrators, as leaders. We don't talk about that in the way that we think about them. And so that allows us to kind of keep some of these things that were really built in a kind of sort of racist, but definitely anti-Black frame. Some of these things, they were built like that. They were built in many ways with that in mind. And because we are byproducts of that, we're kind of built with them in mind too, and built for them as well. And so I think that the pathway forward for us is to develop first a recognition of those things and what they were, and deconstructing them, and being very honest and open and candid with all humility, but being also honest and open and candid about what those things are. And then that'll allow us to be able to have a little bit more of a growth mindset as it relates to disrupting, dismantling, unlearning, and then relearning how to do this thing that I think we all want for the future. And so I think that, again, if I was to summarize it into those two, it was definitely like looking at the young people that we're working with and understanding that they have assets that we have an opportunity to activate, but then also looking at our own selves and saying that maybe the deficits are in us. The deficits aren't in the young people. And so we got to work on ourselves and recognize our own deficits. And again, not from a negative that I'm not good space, but more from a growth mindset perspective, because in a growth mindset, you see challenges as opportunities, right? Feedback or these chances for growth, right? And so if we can start to really dismantle those things and remove our kind of oppressive thinking about ourselves, that I want to be a master teacher so that I can oppress someone else with my mastery, right? And then, and kind of just kind of rethink that. I think that is the pathway. I tend to not so much talk about the challenges. I don't talk about the challenges as it relates to the young people, because they're just young people, right? They don't have deficits. And if we can really think about it from that perspective, that they don't have deficits, it's those of us in power who have the deficits. Then I think that's the best way to think about it. One of my colleagues, we have music therapy here, and one of my colleagues, and I'll step back after this, one of my colleagues said that, when you think about someone who might be blind, he works with special needs individuals. He said, someone who's blind is perfectly capable of using the bathroom, but the system and structures around blind people oftentimes oppress their ability to be able to use a bathroom. Things are not in Braille, they're not accessible to them. So the idea that that person has a deficit is wrong. They're not the ones with the deficit, right? The deficit is in everything around them. That's where the deficit exists. And so a young person doesn't have a deficit, we do. And so we got to work on our deficits so that we can be better for these individuals around us. And so, to me, I think that's the greatest challenge, is because there are very few spaces who have the humility to be able to actually openly, honestly, and candidly say that and live and walk in that. But I think that the future is in those places that do.
That is so wonderful. I'm seeing a common thread of it's really going kind of above and beyond what is expected in this field of work, and what you guys are especially doing in order to bring this type of inclusive environment, this network that really doesn't treat the child as this empty vessel needing this fulfillment. They have so much and they bring so much, and it's this partnership where you come together and you can really create those beautiful moments. And I totally love and understand what you're saying. So I'm really wondering, on the flip side of that, in your work, what are some common arguments against, making these meaningful changes that you're doing, and especially in the education sphere? And, how do you deal with those, and what are some of the effective ways to dismantle them? I would love to start this question off with Tony.
Against it, huh? Well, that's a good one. Why can't I go last on this one? I'd love to get some additional thought on that. No, listen, it's hard for me to answer that question, because, how do you deny anyone an opportunity to realize their potential? It's fundamentally, I can't even get my head around that, although I've experienced it, many of us have, and of course we're probably where we are because we ignored that, and we persisted and we fought through and we believed in ourselves. I think we need to make a change in our education sphere, absolutely, by embracing the fact that how are we going to fill these concert halls if we can't get people energized, about what happens within those halls? And so therefore, we have to work on investing ourselves and our energy and resources into the communities in which our kids and families are existing in, right? And we need to start to understand what's going on in that groundwater, that stops them in their tracks from achieving all that they can. So I think what I'd like to see is less investment in concert halls, more investment in community. And if you can invest in those communities, providing the resources that are needed, then you can ultimately see kids from those communities be successful, right? And so to me, there's no reasonable objection or argument against making that change happen. It's why we exist, to do just that.
Right. What I'm hearing is, there's almost this kind of skip step. They want to get straight to the concert hall without kind of doing the work that needs to happen right in between, the crux of the matter, right? Exactly. I'm wondering if maybe from this field of, college and academia, Sara, Dr. Haefeli, if you've experienced any of those feedback, that negative feedback, or, objections to what you're doing and what you're believing in.
Well, luckily enough at Ithaca College, people are thrilled about what I'm doing and they're happy that I'm doing it. But when I urge them to adopt something similar, they're in what, Lecolion was saying, that fixed mindset. And so I think it's this definition of teachers have to be experts that's really problematic. Teachers have to be learners. So if the violin professor has a student that wants to play fiddle tunes, and she says, well, I don't know how to play like that, so you can't do that, that's the wrong answer. The wrong answer is, I've got an excellent ear, I know how to find resources, I can give you feedback on your sound, let's figure it out. So I think that's one of the primary barriers to this kind of change, is that people have to stop seeing themselves as as necessary experts and need to adopt this attitude of learning. I think that the other barrier is our definition of prestige and what's prestigious. That's really, really problematic. So, arguments against changing the theory or history curriculum are, well, maybe students won't be able to pass their graduate entrance exams if they go to graduate school if they don't have the white canon music history or music theory background. If they have a more diverse education, they won't be able to hit this next prestigious step. And I think that's something we need to be really, really aware of. It goes back again to this idea of, how are we assimilating people? How are we limiting them from being themselves? How are we not trusting them to pursue their own best interests? I want to just get a huge cross-stitch thing that says trust the students, right? The students can lead us in the right direction. They know what they need. And we are experts at learning, and we can step alongside them and learn with them.
I got chills with that. Teachers, yes, they need to be learners, not experts. That's also goes back to that growth mindset we've been talking about. That's fabulous. Rufus, any thoughts on this?
Well, for me, and especially in my role as lead conductor of the Miami Music Project, this organization in Miami is designed to provide opportunities for students in low-income areas who are part of the public school system, but the public school system does not have a music program. We provide opportunities for them to come when we were in person, to come to a set school in the district to get lessons, free lessons, and music theory, music history. And our program allows for 3 full orchestras in the vein of a traditional youth orchestra, but something that the students don't have to pay for. They just have to have a desire to want to make music. I think the barrier for me, or kind of the negative aspect of being in that program and trying to deal with the students and going where they are and meeting them, and not looking at them as having a deficit. I love that because they don't. But recognizing that everyone, if given an opportunity and given excellent instruction, can succeed. And this idea, because these students, in the majority of 80% are on free lunch and breakfast, or in one-parent households, and have difficulties in ways that we perhaps can't imagine, can't succeed. And so therefore, a program should be more to transform them, to give them the experience or the exposure of a different music. And I have always been the mindset, provide any student who wants to learn excellent instruction, no limitations, and watch them grow. Definitely take into consideration that they're coming from an environment that may not be like yours. You have to recognize that. I bring crackers and little sandwiches, or I make sure if they're hungry, I make sure I bring lotion. I bring things that a bottled water. That's not going to be your excuse for not learning today. I am going to meet you, and then when we get there, you're coming up with me. You're coming up with me. That's really, really important. So I have to fight that, because I have colleagues who are well-meaning, and I know they're well-meaning, and they will put limitations on these students simply because of where they come from. And they will compare them to students who, say, can pay for membership into a youth orchestra program, or has a thriving, vibrant public school program. And because these students don't have that, well, let's just give them the experience. Let's just give them the exposure, as opposed to let's give them excellent instruction, expect a return, as long as we are meeting those needs that might be unique from their counterparts at some of the more established youth orchestras. And so for me, it's not allowing those circumstances be a crutch or an excuse for not thriving in an environment that you want to be a part of. And again, we do this in programs in public schools, where kids may not have a desire to become musicians, the vocation in music, but the expectation is that you come to receive excellent instruction, and the return is that you're going to do the work that's necessary to keep it at a very high artistic level. So that's really important to me. I want to meet the needs of all of my students, but I'm a music educator and I want the best from them, and I want the best artistry presented to them and that return. And so fighting that, which is a daily fight for me, is something that I hope to not have to fight too much longer.
Yeah, it's the quote unquote little things, right, that actually aren't so small, and making sure a child actually really succeeds in this. Lecolion, you operate and have operated in so many different spaces in academia. I'm really wondering what your thoughts on this are.
Well, I think in all of the various spaces where I have existed, whether it was from a performance space or academic space, or even now from an arts administrative space, there's this idea of the myth of absence. That has been one of the common arguments, is that there are things that don't exist. George Lewis, who's a Black composer, he was the one who introduced me to that phrase, the myth of absence. And so people will say, I don't know of any Black composers. I don't know that there are any. Where would we find music by Black composers? And I'm like, child, please, Google's been around for a minute, right? Like, that's an easy one, right? Like, that's actually the easiest of answers. I mean, these things, and I think that we make these things so much more difficult. It's like we make them like chess, and it's like checkers, man. It's like some of these things are really simple and kind of binary options. And so I think that the myth of absence, it happens from a repertoire perspective. It happens in band programs, orchestral programs. It happens in individual instruction, chamber music. I had a International Chamber Music Festival. We had a requirement that when our faculty, when they recommended music, if they recommended any piece that was from the canon, they were required to recommend a piece either by a composer of color or by a woman composer. So if you want to play the Beethoven String Quartet, you got to send us George Walker. Like, that is, it was just like a given. And also, we had a requirement on our concert programs that half of the performers in the series, 60% of the performers had to be people of color, self-identify as people of color. Half of the music had to be by women and or people of color. And half of the number of minutes of performance had to be by women and or people of color. And so it wasn't one of those things where you can play the 1-2 minute piece by a woman and then you don't play anything else after that. So it had to be like the number of minutes. And our faculty were really annoyed by that at first. And then as we started to do it, they were like, they realized they were being introduced to some of the best music that was written in world history by this particular requirement. And so they they learned to fight their way through this myth of absence. Right, and the myth of absence came from those who were in power. The disruption of the myth of absence came from those who were in power because we required it, right? And so they had to go and Google and go and listen to YouTube and find one of the best chamber pieces I've ever played, the Samuel Coleridge Taylor Nonette. It's one of the greatest chamber pieces I've ever played. That's for mixed strings and winds and piano. It's a beautiful piece of music that I was introduced to actually by opening the book and putting my finger down on pieces for 9 instruments that had bassoon in them. Right? I mean, it was the simplest process ever. But then there's this kind of myth of absence. I think also not only from a repertoire perspective, but just from an artistic perspective. Like Black artists don't exist. Like artists of color, like they don't exist. Me and my wife used to make these. We used to make these jokes because I'd get called throughout the year to play concerts, but every weekend in February, my calendar was full because it's Black History Month. My calendar, I was turning them away, right? Because people were like, we really want to have, a Black person this month, and we don't know what your instrument is, but you're Black, come on. Well, we don't know what a bassoon is, but you're Black, come on. We need somebody like that this month. And now, as I have and as I have developed as an artist, I tell people all the time, I don't go to Black History Month performances anymore because I say I'm Black all year. I'm not just Black in February. And so if you don't recognize my existence the other 11 months, I'm not going to recognize yours in this one. But I do think that, these ideas of this myth of absence, there are all these artists. We don't know where we're going to find wonderful, violinists of color. It's like, I'm looking at one, right? Right. And so I think that is one of the biggest arguments that exists out there. We wanted to hire someone in this position who was a person of color, but we didn't know of anyone. We didn't, no one applied, right? And those things are also ridiculous because when I was a faculty member, the majority of the people who went there knew somebody there. Right? Most of the people, they were like, oh, you went to school with blank person. I will have them call me up and I'll put in a good word for you. So there was this counterculture, this hidden culture that was actually happening within the place, that there were some people who didn't have access to it. And so again, the system was creating this absence and then saying that now people aren't there and it's a meritocracy. And so again, there's this myth of absence and the myth of the meritocracy, I think, that kind of are at play. And those are the most common arguments. We wanted to have the best person. We wanted to hire the best candidate. And I have been on so many searches where, all things being equal, maybe we didn't always we hired the one who we thought would do the thing that we cared about, right? Like, that's who we ended up hiring. And, again, there was a system that was built to work in favor of some and to the detriment of others. And so I think that, again, if the questions around what are the common arguments, there are these things that are kind of created really to support the status quo. And so all of the arguments, like, I don't know where they are. I don't know how to find these pieces. We just want to hire the best person. Sometimes even that frame is an exclusionary frame, because you want to hire the best person to do the thing that you want. So if all you want to do is maintain the status quo, then that's what you're hiring for. So you're not going to hire somebody like me who's going to come in and want to play music by Black artists, right? Like, I'm not going to be hired because you're going to be like, yeah, but I think he takes that too seriously. Does he do anything else besides that? Right? And it's like, then I would say, you didn't ask the person who was playing Schubert. You didn't ask them that same question. You're asking me that question. Right? And so to me, those are the common arguments. There are arguments like that are meant to keep everything the way that it is. And they primarily come from those who believe they're seeking for disruption. It's those who think that they want to do something different, who will say, yeah, I know he knows that, but does he also know the Mozart concerto? Could he also do that? It's like, bro, I went to conservatory. Of course I know the Mozart concerto, but maybe I am doing other things also right now. Right? You're not asking that other person, do they know the Chevalier de Saint-Georges bassoon concerto? Right. And so again, I think that, those are some of the arguments. And I think that those of us who are in positions of power and those of us who are students, I think even have to learn to have counters for all of them and to be prepared to counter them and to be able to say, did you ask the Schubert guy? Did you ask the person who was putting on Schubertiades if that is, if they were problematic? If you're not asking them that, don't ask me that. Right? Because it's not fair. It's racist for you to ask me that and not to ask them that. And so that would be, to me, those would be some common arguments to have and to be prepared for also.
Could I just add to that? I'm 52 years old. And I say that because, first of all, I don't look good for 52. But secondly, I said I'm at a point where when I'm dealing with folks who will ask questions about who I am and what else can I do, I'm at a point where I just say, look at my CV. It stops the conversation. I don't engage in that at all, because it is racist. I agree with you completely, because I know for a fact that my white counterpart are not being asked certain questions. And so I've gotten to the point where I just look at my CV, and they get that that question should never be asked again. Should never. Just wanted to add that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. I think we've gotten a really good picture of a lot of various challenges in the sphere of music education. I've sort of seen them on the administrative side, on the teacher side, and also specifically sort of in defense of students, and knowing that they are already enough. They bring so much to the table. And I have to say, as a teacher myself, I think that this idea of teachers having fixed mindsets and approaching problems as sometimes being a teacher deficit as opposed to a student deficit is really tough, I think, for a lot of teachers to grapple with, and partially just because of this sort of myth of the expert and the genius and all of that. It's really hard. And so anyone that's watching this talk right now, I think it's worth just sitting down for 5 minutes and just thinking about that, because I think it's rampant, especially among performance faculty, applied faculty. But anyway,
Stephen, I'm sorry to butt in on that, but I'd like to say that I enjoy a certain privilege as a white woman that has tenure at a music conservatory. I can say that I don't need to be an expert because my job is secure. No one's questioning me on my credentials. So I do want to say that that is a position of privilege that I enjoy, whereas contingent faculty of color don't have that same privilege of being able to say to the students, I'm not an expert, let's figure it out, because the students ding them on their course evaluations in a way that they wouldn't a white professor. So I just wanted to call that out.
Yes, that's true too, and a fear that I think about a lot as well. So that is very true. I wanted to harken back to some of these challenges that you all presented, and see if we can maybe flip the switch and think in a little bit more of a positive light, and see what are the paths forward, with these things. What words of advice might you offer? So I think it might be nice to start with you, Sara, and Sara, and maybe Lecolion as well, sort of talking about the teacher side of things. How can we come to the table trying to be more student focused and trying to humble ourselves and give the students really what it is that they need? Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, so I would say the most revolutionary thing that I've done with my teaching, one was to stop lecturing and to present case studies where students really get to use a moment of our musical history or present as a starting place for their own inquiry, and then they pose their own research questions and can pursue whatever it is that they want to based on that case study. That's one part of it. But the other really revolutionary part of it was I stopped grading them. And that made all the difference. So students are showing up to class because they want to be there, they want to engage, and it's no longer a punitive situation. And so if you're curious about how to approach or do something similar in your own classes or in your own studios, the term to Google would be ungrading. And I've just found that when you trust the students to know what it is that they want to learn and what they want to explore in the world, that they show up in just remarkable, miraculous, impressive ways. And they get to grow as individuals and express their own individuality. And we're no longer I'm no longer trying to make them all come out. This assembly line process is the same product.
Yeah, I appreciate that. One of the things that when I was teaching, it took me a while, was after I got tenure, of course, because I needed everyone to hear my students play the Mozart bassoon concerto to realize that I could teach. But 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 I would say that one of the things that I started doing the last few years, last probably 5 or 6 years that I was teaching, was I would tell my students that they had to play some piece that was meaningful to them in some manner in which they self-identified. And so they could decide for themselves. They could say, I identify as Black, or I identify as a woman, or I identify as someone who's from the South, or I identify as someone who's British or French. And so they could, but it was kind of asking them to explore their identities through their art form, and through just playing the bassoon. And I was introduced to several great works through that. And so that was a way for me to give up some of my own power, because they would be going to YouTube and going to libraries and going on to IMSOP and Googling things. And so the students would find things that I never wouldn't be looking for, because after a while I was playing more by Black composers. And so I wasn't looking necessarily for the same types of rep by, New England white women composers, right? That was just like a thing it was like a group of composers that I wasn't necessarily searching for. And so it was really great for the students to engage in that process. And more often than not, the best pieces they would play on any jury or recital were those works. It was the works that they identified themselves and that they made a connection to personally. Like those tended to be the ones they played the best. They spent the greatest amount of time on those works. That was the one where I was like, you got to play this Saint-Saëns. They're like, I don't want to play Saint-Saëns. I want to play this one by Nancy Galbraith, And so, and so I was like, okay, but it allowed them to start to engage in this sense of identity through playing music. And so I would encourage really the academic faculty to just learn how to trust. And that's a very difficult thing to do. But we have to do that. We have to learn how to trust them. If we accepted them into our studios, we have to learn to have a bi-directional relationship with them. And a bi-directional relationship can only be created through a sense of trust. Because I got to trust that I have something to offer you, and I've got to trust that you have something to offer me. And so I'm searching in you for what you have to offer me. I think that all of us love music, and we became educators because we felt like we had so much to give. There's always so much compassion in that we have so much to give. But I think that it's important for us to continue to reframe that, but we also have so much to receive from it too, because every teacher who I know of who's retired, they always say the same, or retiring, they say the same thing. I got more from them than I ever gave. We always say that, but we don't do it, and we don't do it in real time. We reflect on it later. But what would it look like if we were just doing that in real time? I'm getting more from you than I'm ever giving to you. And so I think that would be the answer. It requires, we always go tactical, but the tactic can't work if you're not framed correctly. And so we have to be reframed in order to tactically be able to do this type of work. And so to me, I would say that the first thing I would say is trust, have some humility, right? Learn to have some compassion, and learn to give up some power. And then the tactics actually will come to you, because the tactics flow from that framing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And getting to some of what Rufus and Tony were talking about, I think that you guys were really touching on some core issues of just students being able to show up with their basic needs met and being able to show up with the in a mind in a state of mind where they can learn and can think about music or something like that. And so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts. You offered some things earlier about how you're tackling those issues, but any thoughts for people in organizations like yours about how they can best set up their students to be successful?
Well, I can certainly say from Heart of LA's perspective, I think our approach has been that when we started the orchestra program, we said, orchestra is a metaphor for community, and when you think of it that way, you have all these different instruments, they each have their own unique sound, their own gifts, if you will. And, the teaching artists, we don't consider the teaching artists, authoritarian figures. We think of them as mentors. And we think about the musicians as amazing individuals who have potential and great gifts. And so as a community, we're going to pick each other up when we fall. We're going to dust each other off, and we're going to rise together. We're going to learn together. We're going to grow together. And I think if that's the approach, first and foremost, recognizing, of course, that, this transformation, this change, it's not an overnight thing, right? In time, though, if you can make that your approach, absolutely, I became a believer. The quality of the sound and it will be there. It will be there, regardless of whatever the obstacles were that you had as a community, as an individual to begin with. And so I love what has been shared here today. I just agree with all of it, that humility, this idea that I'm learning from you as much as, you might be inspired by some of what I've done. For us, the success isn't that they become the next Gustavo Dudamel. For us, it would be that maybe they become the first in their family to choose to go to college, or maybe they become the first in their family to be the person who hires the orchestral, ensembles that are going to record on this next movie, so that when, there's a movie that isn't perhaps led by a black male lead, you could still have an orchestra, that's reflective of the society in which we all want to see, right? So, look, music is an instrument, in a no pun intended, for bringing about social change. And it doesn't have to be directly through music, but I think can certainly have an effect on equity for everyone in all career fields, to include music. So these are things we found successful. And I think the other thing is we've given youth a voice. Youth council. We asked the students, what do you like? What are you seeing? What do you want more of? And we did some listening, some deep listening. And they said, we want to understand what all the different possibilities are. Not just the narrow focused ones that you always seem to, people, society, systems always seem to pigeonhole us into. What more is there out there for us? Can you introduce us to that so we know? They say, can we have world music? Can we have big bands? Can we have rock music? So now we have these things. So our best work has come not from lecturing, but from listening.
If I could add to that just a little bit, for me, it's just being there, being present. It has become so clear to me, especially in the way I'm teaching many of my students now through Zoom, that I'm not doing the physicality of what it is as a conductor. I am communicating with them. Yes, I listen to them. I offer things that could help them become better on their instrument, but I'm there every single Tuesday and Thursday night. I'm on Zoom with my 33 plus students. We're in good shape if we get 33 that come online with us every Tuesday and Thursday. But just being there and being prepared to answer, I don't know, but I'm here. And let's keep talking, because that connection is, I think, more important than anything that I can offer them from a artistic perspective, music, instruction, just being there. And I think that has been such a blessing for me, because if I can't make it one day because I have an engagement or something, I get an administrator that emails me, "Are you coming back on Thursday? They missed you on Tuesday." Well, my goodness, that makes me feel so good and purposeful, that I have purpose, and that this is truly my calling to give back and to provide opportunities, but most importantly, just being present.
Thank you. Thank you all for such inspiring and powerful words and messages. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know we only have a few minutes left, but I wanted to pose a question about what I think is a very important facet of education that we may not have touched quite enough on, which is the role of the parent. And I talked a little bit about my mother earlier, and I got to be totally honest, and Lecolion, you know this probably as well as I do. I owe 100% of all the success and opportunity I've had. I feel is on my mother's shoulders. I mean, I'm so grateful to have a mentor and an inspiration and a role model like that. And I don't mean to leave my dad out of the equation, but I got to be honest, music was my mom's thing. That was it. And I look around and I see, I've had the opportunity to teach a few young kids, and the role and the relationship between the parent and student is something that I find to be so widely varying. And I find that the level of success that a student may have can depend quite a bit on that relationship and that dynamic. And I wondered if any one or all four of you may have some words of advice or some perspective or just some thoughts to offer those parents of music students or prospective music students who may be watching and may have this question for themselves or for their kids. Lecolion, please.
Since I went last every other time, I'll go first on this one to give others a chance to frame an answer. There's a couple of things in there. So Eric Booth, many of you may know Eric Booth, who's the father of teaching artistry. He's the teaching artist guru in America and internationally as well. And he's become a friend, and he worked with, when I was working with the Memphis Music Initiative, he came and did a workshop for our teaching artists, and he brought some research from Harvard's Project Zero. He did a whole spiel with it, but I'll do it short. His is better. When he does it, it's better, but I'll just give you the answer to the pop quiz. But what Eric said was, there were two. We oftentimes think that the quality of a teacher, the engagement of a parent, the quality of a school, money, like these are the determinants of student success. But what the Harvard Project Zero's, what that research stated was the two greatest determinants of student success were not those. They weren't even top two. The single greatest determinant of student success was the motivation of the learner. So a motivated student is going to learn no matter what their environment is. We might have some differences on what they learn, but a motivated student is going to learn. The second greatest determinant after the motivation of the learner, after that whole intrinsic motivation component, the second greatest determinant was the social environment in which the learning occurs. So if you have a motivated learner in a supportive social environment for that type of learning, they are going to learn. And so what I would say as a parent, and speaking as a parent, one of the things we think about is what are the ways in which we're motivating our sons to want to learn? How do we motivate them to want to learn? And then how do we create social environments for them where learning can actually occur, whether that's in sports or it's in dance, which is the two things that my sons do, whether it's academically as well. Even when we're working with them, we try to make it fun, because the social environment in which the learning occurs, it actually matters. It's not the throwaway thing that we hope they have fun. Actually, they won't learn if they don't. Right. And so if you want the students to learn, I would say that. And I would say that, for what I know about Randal's mother, that was something that she was doing naturally anyway. Randal was, of course, a motivated person, and his mother was able to support that. Now, I don't want to speak for your family because, but just what I know of Gigi, but I've also felt like in your case and the case of your siblings as well, the social environments that they were placed in were also something that she cared about, because the organization that that me and my wife founded, that your siblings were in, your mother was involved in that organization as well. Your father was on our board. Because again, the social environments in which that learning was occurring, it actually mattered to them. So I would say that if I were thinking about ways in which parents could support their young people, it's not just about trying to provide, the best instruments or trying to get them all in a youth orchestra. I wasn't in either of those things, and I wasn't in a youth orchestra, nor did I own an instrument. But I was allowed to be in supportive social environments for learning. And anytime I was motivated, my motivation was always supported by my family. And I did not come from a family of means by any stretch of the imagination. But those were the things that I did have. And so I would say that from a parent, if you can provide that, that's the best probably outcome. But if you can put your young person in places and spaces and around individuals that can provide that type of support, that is also another pathway to success for them, according to Harvard Project Zero.
I just looked up an article that I read the other day called Children Learning and the Evaluative Gaze of School. And the subtitle to it is Why a Watched Pot Loses the Desire to Boil. And so what I would say to students is the thing that I'm going to say to teachers too: trust your children, trust them that they know what they want to do, that they will have the motivation to do it. When we watch them too closely, they realize that they're doing it either to please or displease us, and that's not the right motivation, right? They need to be doing it for themselves. So I learned this the hard way with my son, who was taking trumpet lessons at the college, and I could sit outside the room and listen, and my students, my music history students would say, "Why are you sitting here?" It's like, "Well, I want to overhear the lesson." They said, Don't listen to him practice. Don't listen to the lessons. Let this be his thing." And that was really great advice. Now, it goes totally against all the Suzuki advice, right, with their parents in the room. So I don't know what to do with that.
I think that's a very important perspective as well. Rufus, I saw that you had unmuted yourself for a second there. I don't want to leave you out, and then I think we've got to wrap up here.
Okay, so I'll make it quick. What's been said is so true. I see it in practice every day. I'm working with my students in Miami Music Project. The motivation is that they want to be in school, after school, with their friends. So that's a motivation in terms of socializing. And they know with that, okay, so I better be where I need to be on the instrument. And then, of course, what they're provided while they're there is encouragement, opportunities to grow, to think outside of the box, that they are heard, we listen to them, and open for new ideas. And I think that is fertile ground for what my students are experiencing now. So I agree with what's being said. That's it.
Awesome. Oh, sorry, Tony, go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say that I could not agree more. We're all in this journey together in life, and we just have to go along for the ride. Stop trying to control it. There's a higher power that's got to play it. We get to enjoy it together with our students. and we get to support each other along the way. And that's what makes it fun. And I think that's what creates success. And I hope to God we can see a little more of everyone in the future, in the places that we've all been accustomed to.
Yes, absolutely. Well, those are fantastic words to conclude our discussion here with today. I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much to all of you, our panelists, and all of you watching at home. I know that I've learned a lot today, and I think that for Randal and Anthony as well, we just always feel extremely inspired, and are grateful for the opportunity to speak with all of you. And I think all of your students are really, really lucky to have the opportunity to work with you. So thank you so much for spending your evening with us.